I'm Susan Flory, and this is The Big Middle, my podcast about the big issues of longer midlife, smashing stereotypes and shifting attitudes as we celebrate how lucky we are to still be here. Hotelier, author, social alchemist, disruptor, student, sage, modern elder. That's how my guest Chip Conley introduces himself on his website. Click into it and you find this quote: "Young enough to take up surfing, old enough to know what's important in life." Now that's from his latest book, number 5, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. And alongside that quote, a surfer dude, a photo of Chip heading back to the beach, big smile. I looked at that, Chip, and I thought, well, that's your Daniel Craig moment, albeit with a rash vest on.
Yes, I've always wanted to be James Bond.
Yeah, why not? Why not? Doesn't everybody? Is out there on a board one of your happy places, Chip?
You know, it's one of my liminal places. Maybe we'll talk about what the word liminal means during our talk today, but it's a space where I do appreciate being attuned to nature, but I also feel awkward at times. And so I think actually in midlife, knowing that you can feel awkward at times is probably a great way to ratchet your expectations properly.
Keep your comfort zone constantly shifting so you feel adrenaline rushes and the alive nature of being alive.
And just being curious and a beginner. You know, I think when we stop being a beginner and stop being curious, it's all downhill from there.
Isn't it just? Now, I've reached you on the edge of the Pacific in your slice of Mexican paradise, your new Modern Elder Academy. You call it the world's first midlife wisdom school. What happens there?
Well, let me give some back framing on this. I was writing a book, and as I was talking to people, and everybody I was talking to was in midlife, and I got more and more clear on how bewildered and anxious people felt. And what was clear is that people had built some wisdom along the way and maybe some mastery, but they weren't really clear where to repurpose it in the world and whether it was even valuable. And so I have had a long history of working with personal growth retreat centers, been on the board of the Esalen Institute, a famous retreat center in California. And I decided, well, you know, most of these retreat centers are just beautiful spaces to do workshops, but wouldn't it be interesting if there was a place, the Modern Elder Academy, where people actually didn't just have a beautiful facility, but we were also the facilitator, in the sense that we created a curriculum that's quite specific to what does it mean to navigate midlife transitions. And so the Modern Elder Academy opened at the start of 2018 on a beta basis, and then starting this November, it was open to the public.
You call it a midlife pit stop, a chance to reset and reframe that lifetime of experience. Is it only for people mid-40s through mid-70s, which I call the big middle?
Yeah, you know, I actually, interestingly enough, when you live in the Silicon Valley area, which is where I've been for the past 35 years, midlife starts in the mid-30s because people start feeling irrelevant around their 35. And so it's 35 to 75, with the core of the group being mostly 45 to 65. Average age is about 51 or 52. And what the people who are coming are often either in a state where they've had a relatively successful career and now they're in a place where they're trying to repurpose themselves and figure out how they can make a difference out there in the world, or they're actually struggling in midlife and have not felt financially or career-wise successful, and they're looking for a way to re-inspire themselves. Or in certain cases, it may be someone who's going through all kinds of transitions in life unrelated to their work. Maybe a divorce, or a family member passing away, or their own medical diagnosis, or empty nest syndrome of having their children move away. And they are looking for a place to where they can actually understand how to be liminal. And liminal means basically to be in limbo or in transition from one state to another. And so for the week-long programs that we do, that's what people learn.
What do you actually teach there? I mean, is it succession of workshops involving play and introspection? How do you deliver the curriculum?
It's a week-long curriculum, which allows enough time for people to go into a pretty substantial transformational mode. We really evaluate on the front end our mindset. You know, what is the mindset that we've come to this workshop with in terms of what are the identities and the ways of thinking that have defined us to date, and which of those do we want to actually let go of and move on from. In my book, I talk about the first step, I think, in midlife to getting to being a modern elder is the idea of evolving, being in an evolutionary state where you're moving from what you were to where you're going. And that process requires a mindset shift often. And so that's one of the first things we do. But we also help people to understand appreciative inquiry, which is a way of asking questions better. How to use nature as your teacher. What does it mean to be a mentor or a counselor? And what is mutual mentorship? We live in a workplace today where there are 5 generations in the workplace at the same time. So how do we mutually mentor each other?
I like your definition of modern elder. You say curiosity opens up while wisdom edits down. Can you explain that more fully?
Sure. The interesting thing about the idea of being in midlife and the new idea of an elder. So the historical idea of an elder was they were regarded with reverence because they had age-old wisdom that, in a world that didn't change all that much. But today the world changes a lot. And I think the modern elder is not regarded for their reverence, but for their relevance. And relevance means that you're often as curious as you are wise. The wisdom is what you bring to the table that we know that you built over time. The curiosity is the part that people haven't usually thought of when it comes to people in midlife. Being able to have a sort of holistic way of looking at things and getting the gist of something. I think that people in midlife have more questions than they know. And sometimes those questions, that curiosity, is what helps people to realize, wow, there's a wonder, there's a state of wonder that you can match that wonder with that wisdom, and that becomes quite potent. And that's what a modern elder is somebody who is as curious as they are wise.
Now, why the word elder, as in elderly, 85 plus to my mind, not over 45s through 70s, or as you put it, Silicon Valley, where people are thinking about getting Botox in their teens. Why not modern, older?
Well, it's a good question. And some people have a lot of people have a challenge with the word when they first hear it, because it does sound a lot like elderly. And I think elderly is like your last 10 years of your life. So if you're going to live to 95, it's 85 to 95. And of course, when I'm talking about elder, I'm not talking about that period. But I am suggesting that elder is a relative word. It has a lot to do with who you're surrounded by. And if you're a 40-year-old surrounded by 20-year-olds, then you may be the elder in the crowd. And what does that mean? In the past, the elder, everybody would have to respect the elder. Well, today, I think, again, the elder brings to the table the wisdom of, the good judgment that they've been able to develop over time based upon pattern recognition, based upon their process of being able to see their experiences and learn from them.
Before we get into your personal experience, which was the catalyst for the book, Wisdom at Work, your experience with Airbnb, I want to backtrack a bit. So I'm going to string out a few words. The Phoenix, hookers in every room, maxing out credit cards to meet payroll, and salvation in the form of a pop star's tour bus. Now, that's some of the color of your early days, Chip. I'd like to hear a bit of your history, just to understand where you're coming from.
Well, good question. When I was in my mid-20s, I decided that I was fascinated. I was a real estate developer, but I was obviously a very young one. And I was working in San Francisco, and I decided that I wanted to take that real estate background and apply it instead to a form of real estate that I found more creative, which was hotels. And in the United States at that time, the boutique hotel movement in the mid-1980s was just getting off the ground. So at age 26, what can you afford to buy? I'm not from a wealthy family. I raised about $1 million and bought a broken down motel in a bad neighborhood in San Francisco.
I'm conjuring the image now. Lots of pink.
Lots of pink and lots of hookers, as you said. There was a lot of women wearing pink, and it was sort of an unsavory environment.
But your first very reliable customers.
They were, and they paid by the hour instead of by the night. But the way I got started was to take that property that was full of ill repute and turn it into a rock and roll hotel where musicians were staying, and they didn't mind being in a dodgy neighborhood, but they really liked the 1 acre campus and the swimming pool, and all of the rooms faced the central courtyard and the gardens. So that's how I got started, and I called the company Joie de Vivre, which means joy of life in French. And I, ultimately over the course of 24 years, created 52 boutique hotels and became the second largest boutique hotel company in the United States.
So it grew and grew and grew from a tour bus a go-go for all the rock stars.
That's right.
And Timothy Leary, he was a frequent visitor.
Yeah, he was in the second year that we were open, he started staying in the hotel a lot. And he didn't fit the demographic of the hotel, which is male 25-year-old tattooed musicians from Los Angeles. He was in his 70s. He was a famous psychology and psychiatry professor at Harvard who was giving LSD to his students in the 1960s. But, at this point in the 1980s, he's an older guy and doesn't fit the demographic, but he fit the psychographic of the hotel. And that's when I really realized that we were not just in the boutique hotel business, we were in the identity refreshment business. People who came and stayed in the hotel actually saw that the hotel was almost a personal reflection of their aspirational self. And the hotel was sort of an irreverent, funky, cool place. And Dr. Timothy Leary was that.
Funky, cool, and the hotbed of your concept of karmic capitalism.
Yes, karmic capitalism is what goes around comes around. And my premise is that if you create a great culture and you treat your employees well, they will treat your customers well. You'll grow market share, you'll grow profitability, and your investors will be happy with that. And then you invest back in the culture, and it becomes a virtuous circle.
Because you had the forerunner of the Modern Elder Academy was the Joie de Vivre University.
We did have a Joie de Vivre University, exactly. See, you've done your homework, my dear. I love it. Thank you, Susan. The Joie de Vivre University was our in-house university for our students, students being our employees. We had 3,500 employees at our peak. And so people could actually go and learn all kinds of things there. And I was one of the teachers there, and I've always enjoyed teaching.
And you've always enjoyed giving back, paying it forward before it became a cliche of our current times.
Yes. I think that more than anything, my experience, my early days taught me that, and it really helped me later, is that just when you think you've actually come up with your best idea, there's another one that comes along soon after. So, just be open to the serendipity of new ideas, especially when they're serving a greater purpose.
Okay, that's the history bit, bar the fact that, you're very humble. You're a high achiever. You achieved much, but you readily admit that you knew absolutely zip about the sharing economy when you were asked in 2010 to help Airbnb's relative youngsters, ambitious youngsters, democratize the hotel industry. And you came up with the portmanteau mentern to describe your role, mentor and intern. How did that work in practice at Airbnb?
I was asked, and I thought I was going to be just the mentor and the elder, even though I wasn't using that word at that time. But I quickly realized, my gosh, I was 52 years old, never worked in a tech company before, and I had no idea what they were talking about most of the time. They were using this language that just was going over my head. I just didn't get it. And so I realized in order for me to succeed here, rather than pretend to know what they were talking about, I needed to be open to interning publicly and mentoring privately. So I ultimately saw myself as both a mentor and an intern at the same time. And as such, the word mentern got used to describe me.
Now, you give examples in your book, Wisdom at Work, of people in their 50s, 60s, 70s seeking out internships in areas unrelated to their areas of expertise. You say rewire, not retire, and grow whole, not old. You offer guidance on how to make that work. Can we get some of that guidance from you?
Well, Let's start by realizing that most people don't realize how much of their adult life is still ahead of them. You know, I just turned 58, and when I go to longevity sites and put in all my details, it tells me how long it expects me to live, and it says till 98. So let's do the math on that. If I'm going to live till 98 and I am 58, I am exactly halfway through my adult life if I start counting at age 18. And I think really prior to age 18, certainly lots of good things happened, but I really didn't have adult choice in my life. So if I were to really look at my life as an adult period of being 80 years long, I am halfway through my 80 years. So at age 58, I still have a huge amount of my life ahead of me. And I am going to be quite active probably for at least another 25 to 30 years, and maybe working in the workplace that long as well. When you start to think that way, it helps you to realize that it's okay to be a beginner and learn something new, whether that's in the workplace or not. I learned, as you said earlier in the introduction, I learned how to surf, in my late 50s, or I'm learning how to surf in my late 50s. I'm taking up Spanish in my late 50s. So I think there's an element that being open to being in that learner mindset is a really positive thing.
I started this podcast to change the conversation about aging, to shine a light on the social revolution of now, the bigger middle of midlife, the 60-year career, the 100-year life. Professor Andrew Scott was a fascinating guest on the show. And you and I both know the learn, earn, retire, die model of life is obsolete. But Chip, the structural lag of society and culture in recognizing and reacting to this longevity revolution is, well, it's alive and kicking and frustrating for midlifers who've already done their identity reboot. They're raring to go, but they can't get past the outdated mindsets of corporates. And not everyone is equipped or has the desire to become, a member of this exploding industry of coaches and gurus. They just want a job with meaning and purpose, but they still need to make money because a lot of people never had final salary pensions, relics of a bygone time. So can you talk a bit about that, how we need to reframe things?
Well, a couple thoughts. Yes, and I completely agree that there's a certain level of ageism, and it depends on the country and the culture, that it pervades and affects people's ability to go out and rebrand or reposition themselves in the marketplace or in the workplace in their mid-years or later. One of the things I heard recently was fascinating from a well-known executive recruiter. And she said, it may be hard to get a foot in the door in order to get the interview. But let me say, once you get the interview, here's what you need to know. You don't need to dress like a 20-year-old or act like, a millennial. If you show up with curiosity and passionate engagement, it means your wrinkles will fade away. And what people will notice in a job interview is your energy. And when she said that, she said it in the context of, how do you repackage yourself in a way that maybe feels awkward to you because you have to be talking about cultural references of things you don't understand. Her point was, no, you don't have to actually remake yourself into something that you're not. But you do actually have to be curious and passionate and engaged. And when people feel that energy, they really do lose track of what your age is.
But the thing is, it's getting to that interview, as she rightly identified. And that's the big obstacle, because big business, they are out of sync with this new social reality that we're living.
So it's interesting. The timing for this interview is spectacular because I'm at the Modern Elder Academy this week. We have a workshop called How to Prepare for a Job or Career Transition. And the woman who is co-leading with me, Karen Wickery, just had a book come out about how to take the work out of networking. And her point of view, and she's an introvert. So the subtitle speaks to the idea that she's an introvert. So networking doesn't have to mean you're glad-handing and being, just the sort of the vile, slimy person that sometimes we see at networking events.
Pushing their cards into everyone's palm.
That's right. So her point of view is that there's a whole approach, and I would highly recommend her book. Her last name is spelled Wickre, Karen Wickery. The idea of soft contacts, people in your world that you don't know all that well, but you have friends who do know well. And how do you actually find those people who are in the realm of your world and start with that? Just actually applying to a blind job that's been posted may not get you very far for all kinds of reasons. And yes, one of them is that the artificial intelligence robots in the computers often it's not like they necessarily say we won't talk to people who are over 50, but there will be certain qualities that they're going to be looking for in a resume or in an online application that are going to speak to the person's sense of learning and curiosity and their sense of passion. So I think what's really critical is to know that the best way to get the foot in the door is often when someone's opening the door for you. It's a matter of someone saying, yes, you are a good friend of my good friend, and we've never met before, but my friend knows that you are interested in going into the software field in marketing, and your background is marketing of hotels. So, that's a bit of a leap, but I'm open to having an informational interview with you because you're close friends with my friend. And so let's talk. And so that's part of the way you get there. It is very much a matter of using new forms of networking like LinkedIn to get there.
Yeah, it's utilizing your social capital. And I had John Tarnoff, the author of Boomer Reinvention, on as well. And, he was saying the same thing. It's not just about having, as I do, 1,000 connections on LinkedIn. It's activating those connections and contributing and giving, being the giver in the room or online so that you're not always handout asking for something.
Yeah, Adam Grant's book, as Give and Take, I think it is, or Givers and Takers. I think it's Give and Take. That book is a very good book to help people to understand how do you show up in the world when you're most in need, but you show up there to actually provide service to someone else. That kind of karmic capitalism will come back to you in spades in all kinds of positive ways.
And Adam Grant, he's got a great new podcast, Work in Progress, I think it's called.
Yes, yeah, he's a good friend, and he has a beautiful endorsement on the back of my book.
Oh, yay. I didn't spot that.
Yeah.
I think that book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, I think it should be read by people in their 20s and 30s too. But, the hubris of youth and all that, I imagine it would be a hard sell. Eye rolls, many eye rolls in reaction to yet another tome full of advice from someone perhaps seen as having a much easier ride to professional satisfaction and material riches. How would you convince skeptical younger people, I'm thinking 20s, 30s, who think they know it all by virtue of being young and immortal, that they don't, that you have life experience and perspective that can help them figure things out?
Well, there's a series of studies that have all shown the same percentage, which is that about 75% of millennials, let's just call them, let's say people 40 and younger, which is not exactly millennials, but it's close enough. 75% of people 40 and younger would like to have a mentor. And so that suggests that they're not all just know-it-alls. I mean, yes, in some cases they have high expectations and they can be entitled. They see their cohorts like Mark Zuckerberg becoming a billionaire by the time he was 25. And so sometimes they have, unreal expectations. But they're also really looking to find a way to accelerate their growth professionally. And often that means that that's someone older who can help them with that. I personally think it's about a mutual mentorship. The relationship is not one way where the mentorship is just going from the old to the young. I think it actually goes in both directions. And in my relationship with Brian Chesky, who is 21 years younger than me and the CEO and co-founder of Airbnb, I was his mentor, but I was also his intern at times because I was learning from him as much as I was teaching. And I think that's a key piece, is that when an older person shows up as the person who is dispensing wisdom and everybody else sort of has to get on their knees and appreciate it, generally speaking, that looks a lot like a parent or a priest. And most young people don't want to be lectured by a parent or a priest.
Well, much is made of the intergenerational divide, always the negativity surrounding that. And yet we've got a lot of commonality across the age spectrum.
Yeah, I think we have a lot. We do. It's very interesting. And sometimes the person who's 20 years younger than you or 20 years older than you is the person who you're going to really gravitate to because you have a common sort of worldview or psychographic. But I think part of what's interesting is that with young people being as digitally savvy as they are, there's something to be learned from them. And when you come at the relationship from the perspective that what could we teach each other? I think that really helps. You have to start with like, what is it that you have to offer? But then you actually might look at the other person and say, what could they offer me? And I think there's often a good answer to that question.
I think too, this crazy, confusing world that we're in now, it's become precarious for all of us, many of us, youngers and olders. Job sectors have cratered, salaries stagnated, and there are more hazards and fewer perks, and everything, housing, et cetera, costs so much more than most can dream of reaching when they're just setting out post-university or no university. And, we've got the demise of unions, no more final salary pensions. So we have so much more in common over 50s through 70s with people in their 20s and 30s. We're all trying to figure it out.
I'm a big fan of Andrew Scott's work, as you mentioned earlier, from the 100-Year Life. He and Linda Grattan wrote that book. The idea that there's a portfolio life that we are all going to start living, which is you sort of piece together your work life and your income. And you may have a period of your life where you're in the learn stage. And then there's another period of life when you're in the earn stage. And then you retire, or at least maybe take a 6-month sabbatical in your 40s at some point. To just sort of renew yourself, and then you go back out and you learn again. So I think the idea that we are all having to be more entrepreneurial as we think about our career path is pretty well documented at this point, and it is not just for young people. This absolutely describes many of us in the period from 50 to 75.
I liked his idea that we need to shuffle things around. Parents in their 30s and 40s, they're stressed out and they're meant to be achieving peak performance, all of that. And we need to change that up so they have more time, less pressure on them to achieve, having achieved their education and got their foot in the door career-wise, then lay off them for a bit and let the 50-plussers keep their jobs, then bring the 30s and 40-year-olds back again. So they have time to rear better children because everybody's sort of, fumbling the ball now because there are so many pressures.
Well, there's a reason why the U-curve of happiness, which has been pretty well documented at this point, shows that around age 45, people in their adult life are at their lowest point. 45 to 50 is where it bottoms out and starts to get better. And that's partly because that period of life from around mid-30s to mid-40s is such a jumble, with the kids potentially, with the variety. We're in the accumulation mode. And I really think that one of the things that's interesting about the big middle, that point when people move beyond the first half of their life to the second half of their life, is we move from accumulation to editing. And what I mean by that is we accumulate and accumulate and accumulate the first half of our life. And that means roles, responsibilities, friends, stuff. And then we find ourselves in our mid-40s, frankly, sinking under the pressure of it all. And then the second half of our life is really about learning to edit. And so in some ways, I think this is the juxtaposition of knowledge versus wisdom. Knowledge is a mathematical or an arithmetic equation. You're just adding. When you're sort of developing knowledge, you add this plus this plus this plus this. Wisdom is taking all of that and then putting a division equation to it and distilling it down to what's essential or important. And so I think the second half of life is very much about distilling down what's important, which means it's a bit of a division equation. If you are in a place where you can start to imagine what it is you consciously want in your life, as opposed to being in that accumulation stage in the earlier part of life. And that's a good thing, because it really does mean that in our 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond, we're more intentional about what we're choosing to have in our life and who we're choosing to have in our life.
The Modern Elder Academy, the gap year that you're proposing within that, I get the need for a period of midlife introspection and change of direction. I've experienced the anxiety and sense of disorientation hitting halftime brings. It happens without much warning and can really spin you around. You write about liminality and the state of gooey. Very intriguing. Can you tell us about these terms?
Sure. So liminality is probably best known in the journey from caterpillar to butterfly, in which in the middle, the caterpillar has created its own chrysalis or cocoon. And within the DNA of that caterpillar are the early signs of the butterfly. But if you open the chrysalis midway, it would be quite gooey. And so that, I think, describes midlife often, is that midlife can be that period of time where it feels a bit gooey. And it's the second half of life can be a bit like a butterfly. Now, a lot of us don't see it that way. That's not exactly how the world characterizes it. But the U-curve of happiness certainly shows it. And there's a variety of other things that show that, frankly, after about age 50, we get to a place where we start to enjoy our life more. It's partly because of the accumulation versus the editing. But I think the liminality is a recognition that you are in between two states. And there's a whole bunch of work that's been done on the rite of passage. So when you're in a rite of passage, you tend to be in a state of transition, going from one way of being to another way of being. The in-between state, which is frankly the middle of a movie, George Lucas, in creating Star Wars, used rites of passage as his premise for Luke Skywalker. And so the middle of a movie is that transitional liminal state where you're actually in transition to something new. And it can be a scary time. And applying that to our own lives, it means that there's transitions that we're going through. And the question is, how are we being supported through that? And part of the reason I wanted to create the Modern Elder Academy is because, generally speaking, as a society, we've been very good about helping people through puberty or through adolescence to adulthood or through having a wedding when you're going to get married. But we're not very good about creating the social crucible that supports people through midlife transitions.
Not at all. The social crucible is absolutely missing. And we all internalize the negativity around the constant barrage of messages that put old as being a synonym for past it.
Yes. I think that's what's interesting is somehow we think that in middle age, we're supposed to know it all or not have transitions. And yet there's so many transitions that do happen in midlife that just starting with the recognition that they exist and that other people have gone through them, and that, yes, you're going to feel a little bit of being in transition and the challenge of that, that certainly helps people to feel like they're not isolated and alone.
Chip, I took a job in Switzerland when I was hitting 50, and I recall my GP there telling me to get ready for the appearance of my design defects. You get a free pass, she said, until you're 50, but beware, the wheels are definitely going to start falling off the bus in your 50s. Now, you know, she was wonderful, joyful. And in Switzerland, you pay as you go. You pay for your health care, but you get a good hour. And I mean, she literally, from stem to stern, checks you out. So you are very kind. We've talked to one another. You've shared with me that you are facing your first serious health challenge. Tell us about your diagnosis.
Sure. On the second day of my book tour in September, I found out that I have intermediate stage prostate cancer with no symptoms prior. So it came as a surprise. Yes, I'd gone through a bunch of tests, but those were all because of a blood test that showed some elevated status of my prostate. And so now for a few months, I've been in the process of trying to figure out what is the right path. And it turns out that intermediate stage prostate cancer is sort of a paradox of choice of paths. And I do feel somewhat liminal because I thought of myself as fully healthy and I'm in very good shape. And now I feel like, wow, this is in between. I'm in this state of, do they take the prostate out, etc. So it's helped me to see, when you're faced with your own mortality, and cancer can certainly do that to you, it forces you to look at what's important in life, and And it does really make you realize how much you appreciate the social support in your life.
Absolutely. I've got a couple of friends that have had to deal with this, and as you say, paradox of choices. And you had no symptoms. You weren't getting up in the middle of the night and thinking,
No.
This is not right.
No, nothing. Zero. I now have symptoms, which is weird. I don't know. Sort of psychosomatic symptoms. I don't know. But I have, now that I have the diagnosis, I do have some symptoms. So it's a strange thing. And the good news with prostate cancer is it tends to move slowly. But the bad news is that I'm young in my life. Generally men get prostate cancer in their mid to later 70s or in their 80s. That's when the average age is.
Mm. I mean, it's a crapshoot, isn't it? We all know the fragility of life and biochemistry and all kinds of things that come into play. You're one of life's livers, full embrace, no holds barred. Has this awful news enhanced your outlook about how you live every day, changed your rituals in any way?
It's forced me to look at how I'm spending my time. How we spend our time is how we spend our lives. And it's made me ask myself, why am I so driven? I've always been pretty driven in my life, and I've had a lot of success in my life. And so why is it at age 58 I still feel as driven as I do? And how do I take my foot off the gas pedal and go out and just watch the whales off the shore where I live here and see them jump up in the air with joy and have them spouting because they're all going south for the winter. So yesterday I was swimming a bunch of laps in the pool, just staying in shape. And I had just flown in from San Francisco, and I love swimming in the pool here, but it's also a bit of a driven thing about staying in shape. And I could see that it was about to be sunset. So I got out of the pool, toweled myself off, and went and watched the sunset and saw a whale, breach, out of the water.
Beautiful.
So I think the element of appreciating what's there in life and not getting so focused on what I hope to achieve today or in the future is part of what I'm taking from this.
Staring at a cactus or a whale. It's all exactly important and goes to the heart of just being.
Yes. I'm a human doing, and I've done that really well. And I'm a human being as well, but I still am absolutely a work in progress on the human being.
Well, I feel privileged that you've made time for the big middle. We don't have 1 million downloads a day. So I really appreciate that you thought this new podcast was worthy of your time.
Well, I love what you're doing, Susan. So thank you for being a voice out there in the wilderness of midlife.
Thank you for adding to that. Author, hotelier, modern elder, and I'm going to add philosopher and all-around great guy to your list of self-descriptives, Chip Conley. I can't thank you enough, and here from the bottom of my heart to your future.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Links to all on the show page of this episode of The Big Middle. Find it at susanflory.com and all the usual podcast platforms. If you like what you hear and you want to hear more, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, and you can leave a sparkly review there. Potential sponsors like seeing these reviews, I'm told, and I'm keen to find one of those so I can keep bringing you great guests like Chip Conley. Until next time, in 2 weeks.